Welcome back to the channel, everyone. It is time for another double feature where we take two movies that came out recently. We talk about them because time is limiting and doing two videos is harder than doing one video. And there is kind of a theme to this week's double feature because we're talking about two films that have some controversy about stuff that is depicted in the movie. We are talking about the directorial debut from Dev Patel, Monkey Man, and the new Shudder original Late Night with the Devil. Two things I have seen in theaters. Two movies I think work really well in theaters. It's really cool. You know, there's been some talk right now because The First Omen is out, and that's it's like a legacy movie, but it's like a prequel to a thing. But like the original film's currently in theaters, and people are like, well, it's just of course like Ghostbusters is gonna do good and Godzilla's gonna do good. But then you have these two movies, and you're just like, they are kind of interesting and worth talking about, and definitely homage things that you're familiar with in popular culture. So let's start with talking about Monkey Man. This was one that was on my radar from the beginning. It was filmed a while ago. I do believe this was like a pandemic filmed movie, one of the last ones to come out because there was a lot of behind the scenes stuff going on with it. It's Dev Patel's directorial debut. He is a guy who has kind of done a few big things in Hollywood. He's never really like broke big as really like the next guy, but he has always been interesting to see. And he's really fun, creative, and you just like seeing the stuff that he's a part of. And he is an action guy who's never really like led an action thing before, so he wants to make his homage film to the movies that he loves, and he makes it for Netflix for like $10 million. Producer of the project from Monkey Paw, Jordan Peele's like, this is actually really good. We should try to put it in cinemas, so they make a deal with Universal because Jordan Peele's got a deal with Universal, so then they're going to release it here. And now another reason this maybe didn't go to Netflix was there are certain depictions of certain political parties in here that are worth mentioning. Now, I don't know all of the politics that go into this, but I do think you have to talk about that. Because this is a politically charged movie. It is about the people who are oppressed and are treated as lesser than when you're looking at like this fictional place in Mumbai. It's not like based on a real city, which is a really interesting take because then it kind of gives it like, we can get away with certain things being said differently. But there are changes that have been made, like for certain parties that are depicted in the movie. There are certain like things that we didn't say. We show you like certain political leaders, but we don't like name them, or we just show like the actions that they did. And it wants to say something about that message. And you can definitely see how like a Netflix brand who wants to be appealing to everybody is kind of against that, where they don't want to be a part of that. So when like a clear message is made, they don't want to be associated with any like clear thing, so they got gun shy, and that made it go theatrical for some reason. Now, I don't know a lot about this information. What's really going on with like the politics of this movie that wants to say a message and doesn't clearly or inadvertently say that message perfectly. And that is pretty apparent because a lot of this movie is, we're trying stuff out, you know, we're getting our feel, and that's okay. Like, I like action movies when they are handled really well. Sometimes they're not. Sometimes we get some slogs that aren't really anything. But I'm always curious to see, like, where the influence from a specific director comes from, because then you can see, like, what they want to show and what they want to do. And I think with somebody like Patel, he really wants to do, like, the non-American thing. And that's cool. Like this is a guy who, you know, he is a British actor. He is of Indian descent, so he's going to have a lot of different influences than, say, one of the guys that directed John Wick and that kind of thing. And this is hardly a John Wick, and it's definitely more like a guy homaging his love for like Jet Li and John Woo and Bruce Lee and that kind of stuff. And it just has that kind of energy, the fast handheld stuff, the POV movements, the way that we cut. Like, the editing in this movie is pretty insane. We're always cutting to something different. The camera's always in motion. It's very fluid and intense in a lot of that aspect. But on that note too, there is definitely some amateurish stuff going on, and that's okay. You know, sometimes you have to like take the steps as a filmmaker to grow to what you're going to be. And if this is your directorial debut, that's pretty impressive because everything in the action is really well choreographed. It is a really well-paced story. It's not a story that is paced like a normal action film that we see in today's climate from American audiences or from American filmmakers. It's more just like, I'm going to use this reference because I've been watching a lot of old Shaw Brothers films. It's a lot like that, where you start with one thing. Something happens to this guy. He learns a power by going to a temple. He comes back for revenge. The movie is over. That is a lot of what this film is. And you know what? That's pretty cool, because that pacing's really fun, and Patel's a great lead. He's very charismatic, very charming, and I feel like his direction kind of like shies away from certain aspects of who he is, because it's more about like this silent revenge killer and this guy so deadly focused on this one thing as opposed to letting his charisma come through. Now, saying these things, the movie looks really cool. I do like the use of music. There are certain times where like the song choices are like, this is a little too much. This isn't that like good of a choice, or a little too on the nose, but I'm not against that in any real way. I think it handles that particularly well. And the supporting cast is great. We have a lot of Indian actors who I'm not too familiar with, but there's nobody in this cast who feels misplaced. There's nobody who feels off in any capacity. I love all these characters a lot. They have a lot of fun to it, and it does become a story about the haves and the have-nots, the people who are oppressed, and the way we explore that is through a very modern lens. Well, it's still kind of like in the traditional, Hindu narrative and like the Hindu traditions of the transgender culture, which is really, really cool. Not many other movies would do that, where we depict this entire subculture of this, part of the world and show them in this light where they are both scared of the things happening to them and willing to fight for those things. And that was a really cool area to explore, and leans more to like the political aspect of stuff that does come up in this movie. But you know what? For a directorial debut, it's really good. You got to learn the rules before you can break them. So seeing him do the beats and do the formulaic stuff, there's no problem with that. That's what you have to do to get to your next thing. And Monkey Man, the action is clean, the dialogue is fine, the editing is top-notch, some music choices or whatever, but you're walking away with a satisfied and complete vision. That vision is definitely wearing its influences on its sleeve, where you're like, this is something I've seen here, I know exactly what this is doing. But you know what? Dev Patel is a charming enough lead where I am fine with anything he could do, and I want to see more of what he's capable of. So that's pretty cool, pretty fun. I don't hate this movie. I just think, the political stuff that is affecting it will affect it. If you are, unaware or unwilling to see that stuff, then yeah, it's not going to bother you. And if you're not someone who's like a big fan of like wuxia movies from like the classic like South Asian, cinema, then maybe you're not going to perfectly align with what's going on here. But if you focus all that in, the piece is okay. And it has so much more potential than what we are really given. But I don't hate a single part of this. It's pretty creative in some aspects while still being its own story like that. So, Monkey Man, I am going to give a 7 out of 10. So now let's talk about Late Night with the Devil. This is a new Shudder original film that is also steeped in some controversy, because this is a movie that uses AI-generated images, and you're just like, oh, come on, man. And that's upsetting. It's the same thing with like the politics stuff when it comes to Monkey Man. If you are oblivious to that, it's not going to faze you. If you are somebody who is aware and is can very easily detect that use of stuff, it is really annoying, because the rest of this movie is so perfectly curated and handcrafted that it's so upsetting that just a couple of those images show up on screen, even for like a blip of a second, and just detract from the actual story we're telling here. It is so infuriating. It is so annoying that happens. But that's just the case, isn't it? So Late Night with the Devil, we are following David Desmalchin. He is this late night talk show host, and he's not as good as Carson. His ratings aren't as good, and he wants to kind of like spruce things up to get like his ratings back on top. So he is going to do a Halloween themed episode of his show, where a bunch of like truth sayers and seancers and people who can speak to the dead and those types of people come on, And it turns out that we are watching like this archived footage of like a dead television series that nobody saw anymore, and we see the incidents that were depicted in that day. That's a really good setup. That premise kind of rocks. It's really incredible. It's really engaging. It is so well handled. I really think that's cool. And the way we actually go like through the actual timeline of an episode of a talk show. We have the opening guests, we have the opening remarks. It is such a well-paced story that pays off in some big ways. I love that we use the classic aspect ratio for television. I love that it's very film grainy. I love that all of our actors look like they're of the era. It makes this feel so much more special than it should, because this premise is so good. You could do this premise in like a 70s aesthetic, or you could do this premise today with like a Kimmel aesthetic. It's pretty cool that we chose the old one. The jokes feel like they're of the time. The script feels like it's of the time. The camera work, the way we cut in and out of everything, it feels of the time. It is like watching a horror show of Carson. And that's like a cool aspect to see. And as far as like the actual like horror side of things go, it really builds its tension well. It starts off subtle. Is this person being serious or not? Can we like depict it for television? Turns out there's some real things happening. What really sells it is like the character Ian Bliss plays, who is like a skeptic on the entire show, who is just like, I can show you why it's all fake and false and that kind of stuff, and slowly just builds up tension in that capacity. It does that incredibly well. This movie is pretty damn cool, I gotta say. I had a great time watching this in a cinema. The audience was responding really well. Everyone was getting it. Like, this is the vibe of a very specific tone, and it achieved that almost perfectly. There's a couple of moments where it falls flat. The AI stuff, of course, really upsetting. And when you think it's kind of like going to lose itself towards the end. Now, I loved the pacing of the whole time. I think there's a clear moment where the movie could have ended and I would have been satisfied. But then it goes an extra step, kind of loses itself for a minute, but comes back with a really cool moment to like end it off. And I was like, oh, I don't know if it's going to work for me all the way through. But then it did. It came back around and won me over in its end. And that's really impressive. And David Dastmalchian, I love this guy. He is just one of those guys who's a perfect character actor. He can just show up, deliver a line, do it well. Him leading a movie like this, he has the energy of one of those classic guys who's like, I look like I'm sincere and sweet, but at any moment I could break into any direction. It could be tears or anger, and everything I do is for views and for money. And that's a pretty neat thing to see. He handles that well and really creatively. I dig it a lot. And what I also kind of appreciate about this movie too is how it handles like this idea of what you see on TV is either perceived as real or fake. Like, that's a whole thing going through here. Is a lot of the stuff camera tricks, is a lot of it in-house tricks. That's a really cool energy to bring to a movie like this when you're talking about horrors on live television. Like, is this like truly a demon trapped inside this young woman? Is this truly anything? That's a really cool energy to bring. The effects look great. The script is really powerful. This movie is very compelling. And again, it's really sucky that some certain things happen with that. But I'd rather see this movie succeed than it fail. If anything, I believe the next time that these directors or these creatives work on anything, they're going to think twice before they do the AI stuff. So if this becomes a learning curve for them, much like Dev Patel's Monkey Man could be a learning curve for him with the things he wants to say politically or not, hopefully that is the right outcome, that they learn and they take the right lessons away, because this was intense. And it was powerful, and it was moving, and an audience truly reacted to it very strongly. And that's like a really cool sensation to get, because that works well for something like this. The horror aspects of it are really interesting. It's a brilliant idea, and it's executed about as flawlessly as you could that idea. So that's very cool to see. You love to see it. You love the scary energy of just people staring directly down the camera, and then we do like the classic like fade out, and then like a ghost pops out of it. It's pretty cool. Very interesting movie. I'm glad it exists. We talked about stop motion a couple weeks ago. This has the same energy of like, art, man, what is it? It's weird. It's kind of fun. I do respect it. So, Late Night with the Devil, I am going to give a 7 out of 10. Now, quickly, before we wrap things up here, I did watch another movie. I don't know if I want to do a video on this one, but I saw Carol Doda topless at the Condor. It's a really fun documentary. If that's something that interests you, It's definitely worth watching too. I liked it more than both of these movies. But thank you all for watching this episode of Double Feature. Both of these movies are playing in cinemas. Go check them out and support some, mistakes made in terms of like creators doing stuff. But be sure to like and subscribe to this channel. As always, you can check me out on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. And of course, I will catch you in the next one. Have fun. Stay safe. Good luck.